Yitzchak, Isaac, the second of the three patriarchs, was engaged in digging wells. Now, physically, wells are dug to obtain water, a necessary part of life. But why does the Torah tell us so much about these wells? And the Torah goes into detail about three wells that he dug. And the first well that he dug, the Philistines challenged it, claimed that it was theirs. Let's read it in the text. And Yitzchak's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of living waters. The shepherds of Gerar argued with Yitzchak's shepherd, saying, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, which means argument, because they argued with him. They dug another well, that's Yitzchak's servants, and they quarreled about it also. So he named it Sitna, harassment. He moved away from there, and they dug another well. They did not quarrel over it, so he named it Rechovos, expansion, expansiveness. He said, "For now God has made space for us, and we will be fruitful in the land." Nachmanides, one of the great Bible commentators, raises the question why the Torah has to tell us all this. What's so important about Yitzchak digging wells, and two of the wells were challenged and the third well was not? So that Nachmanides says that these are all omens about the future, that there will be three holy temples. Each temple is represented by one of those wells. The first temple was destroyed. The second temple was challenged by the Romans and destroyed. But the third temple that will be built by Mashiach will never be destroyed. There's a 19th century commentary called Chalifos Simlas Binyamin that comes up with a very interesting alternative to this explanation. What I'd like to show is that the two explanations of Nachmanides and of this work are really complementary. He says that the Jewish people have three unique contributions. Two of those are challenged by the other nations. The third one will never be challenged. The third one cannot be challenged. What are these three elements? The first is faith, the belief in one God, monotheism. Monotheism was introduced to the world, although it existed previously. Adam was a monotheist, Noah was a monotheist, Shem was a monotheist, and many others. But Abraham and Sarah were the first to promote it, to publicize it, to disseminate it, that there is only one God. So that's a Jewish contribution, you could say. Abraham was the first Jew. But the nations of the world have challenged that, and they said, we also have faith in God. Some of them said, we're better than you. You have one, we have many. And they criticized us for our radical belief in one God and negating all the other gods, because they looked at the world, they saw different forces, different powers, so they realized there must be some supreme being that is in control of that power, and therefore came up with the idea of multiple gods. To them, it was much more sophisticated than saying there's one God. That was simplistic in their mind. So they challenged the idea of one God. Then other religions believed in a trinity, but they call that one as well. So we're always going through periods when we were being challenged for that belief. And when the first temple was built, the presence of God was so powerful that you felt the oneness of God. But when the Jewish people themselves degenerated in terms of their belief in one God, it compromised into worshiping idols, then the first temple could no longer express the uniqueness of the Jewish person's faith, because the Jews had degenerated into the same type of deviation of faith as the pagans, as the Babylonians who destroyed the first temple. So that's the first well. The first well is one that represents faith, the uniqueness of the Jewish people's faith, but that was challenged and that was compromised, and we lost it. But then there's a second contribution, also going back to Abraham, and then subsequently to Abraham, the other patriarchs and matriarchs, and then the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And that is the idea of justice, of righteousness, of kindness, of our ability to be moral in our relationship with one another. That was something that was unique. Before Abraham, that didn't exist. Yes, there were individuals who were decent people, but society was cruel. Society was built on violence, on wars, and destruction, on fighting and rivalry. in the extreme. And Abraham came along and he introduced monotheism. But what kind of monotheism? An ethical monotheism, a monotheism that doesn't sanctify every vice of yours, regardless of how despicable it may be, but it's a monotheism that believes in a system of justice and righteousness, a system of love and kindness. And when the Jewish people built the Second Temple and they enjoyed that kind of a unity, it thrived. It was a very powerful representation of the uniqueness of the Jewish person's morality and ethics. But when Jews started to quarrel with one another, they started to develop animosity towards one another, as the Talmud refers to it as senseless hatred, we lost the Second Temple, because the Second Temple represented our unique contribution to morality and justice and kindness. And when we lost that, when we compromised on that, the Second Temple could no longer manifest that uniqueness that we have. But then there's the third area of uniqueness of the Jewish people it cannot be challenged. And that is that the Torah that we have deals with every single situation in life, every aspect of life, every situation, every day, every period, every location has a mitzvah that's related to that particular part of you, that particular individual, that particular place and time. We have commandments that govern our food, kosher. We have commandments that govern our clothing, tzitzis that we wear, and prohibition of wearing wool and linen. We have commandments that govern our homes, the mezuzah that we put on our doorposts, that govern our bodies, circumcision, putting on tefillin, and so on. We have commandments that govern our time, that sanctify time. And if you go through all the 613 commandments, you'll find that there's not one part of life that isn't governed and uplifted and sanctified by a mitzvah. Because the ultimate purpose of creation was God wanted to have a dwelling place in the physical realm, in the lowest of existences, which is our physical world, which doesn't automatically respect the presence of one God and of morality and of holiness. And we bring holiness and godliness into every aspect of life. That's unique to Judaism. That hasn't been challenged. And that's why the third temple that will be built imminently by Mashiach, that third temple that will exemplify this third contribution, that we made the whole world into a sanctuary for God, that cannot be challenged, and that temple will last forever. But moreover, that temple will also restore. It's a comfort for the first and second temple. That means we will have the monotheistic uniqueness of the Jewish people. We will have that intact, and the justice and kindness and righteousness in our relationship with others will also be corrected and rectified and intact. So the third temple will have in it the elements of the first temple and the second temple, plus the added uniqueness of God taking over the whole world through our mitzvahs that we do, that we will continue doing in the Messianic age, contrary to the antinomian belief that the Messianic age means we no longer have to do mitzvahs, we're saved without doing mitzvahs. No, that's totally the opposite of Judaism. Judaism believes that when Mashiach comes, we will then do the mitzvahs in a more perfect way, and we will be able to fulfill all the commandments, those that we can't do today because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. So that idea that we could change and correct and elevate the whole world, that will be manifested through the third temple.